thank you all for joining us this morning. Today we'll be looking at the changing skills landscape in professional services. We've heard a lot, I guess, in the last couple of weeks and months about how we've all been adapting to a new normal, a new way of working, but what does this actually mean in practice for the short term, and also what's the longer term impact likely to be on how we all work, how we can gain productivity gains without sacrificing the things that we enjoyed from kind of pre-lockdown ways of working. So to kind of dissect that with me this morning, I've got three great guests. Before I welcome them in, to set the scene, I wanted to share with you just a few key findings from one of our recent polls. So you may remember, those of you who took part, we asked you, one of the things we asked you is how you feel about working from home currently. And hopefully, as you can see on screen, we gave you four options ranging from actually quite enjoying it, not too bad, liking it, and that's where you can see the majority of people are at the moment, 3/4, just under, say that they're enjoying so far working from home. Very few people, thankfully, are finding it a complete misery, but we do have, interestingly, 20% who are perhaps a little bit on the fence, a little bit unsure, and perhaps concerned about staying kind of plugged into their colleagues and the rest of the team. So kind of interesting there that we've got a clear majority of people who are actually liking this new way of working. We also asked you what tips you had in order to stay productive, stay happy, stay healthy during this time. And again, just to share a couple of these with you. So kind of lots of tips around using technology, which I think we're all hopefully getting up to speed with now. But three key themes came out. One was around being more resilient and taking the opportunity to be more productive by putting in things like daily routines. And actually, we've seen that these changes suggest that actually we can work from anywhere. The fact that as a sector we've been able to adapt very quickly suggests that I suspect many of these changes will carry on for the longer term. Lots of you talking about well-being as well, really important. Doing things like taking breaks, taking exercise, having that regular routine, but also being plugged in through regular communications, and the importance of leadership communication being vital there, to know that we're all not taken for granted at this time. And building on that communication point, actually taking advantage of the opportunities out there to connect with people in ways that we may not have done. Actually, now we can do short 30-minute sessions on things that may have been perhaps more of a burden to go out of the office and spend time to do that before. Again, technology enables us to keep in touch with people both in and outside of the organisation more regularly, making sure we diarise time for all of that. So lots of great advice there. And I'm going to ask our panel in a moment, obviously, to kind of share their perspectives and share their thoughts. Before I do that, I caught up with, on Friday, a lady called Kimberly Bradshaw, who's the CEO of Spotlight HR. And I put to her some of these questions, and I asked her what she thought were some of the top tips for staying productive during this new working environment. And I wanted just to show you some of the things that she said.
I think, if everybody's physically well, that's obviously a key aspect, but really regular contact with both fun things and work things is important. Open and honest communications. I really can't reiterate enough how much I've heard that is key. People are scared. It's unusual times. We don't know what's going on. And, good, open, transparent communications and explaining decisions is really important. Obviously, as I mentioned, having a suitable home working environment, but also the wellbeing tools, some you can buy in or create webinars around well-being aspects, stress management, all those kinds of things. But even the basics, like encouraging people to eat well, get good sleep, structure their day, have a plan, try and do something new. I'm trying to learn French because my niece lives in Canada, and she learns half her lessons in French every day. So trying to do something fun, but also having a much better work-life balance, I think, is key. Yes, I think it helps to have a special work area where, that's my workplace and I'm only going to work there and I'm not going to work anywhere else. Also having boundaries around stopping at a particular time so that, you get plenty of rest and, try not to watch the news too much because obviously that can be a bit scary. I just make sure I get the headlines, know what's going on, and then try and, do fun stuff. I think more of a show of care about your staff is important. Let them know how important they are to you, to the firm. That goes a long way to engagement and productivity as well. If people feel that they're special, then they act like it. And certainly, I think everybody needs to reflect on what could have been done better when this pandemic hit. And I really hope that people don't carry on in the old normal and that they use this opportunity for a new normal. And I think my big message in all of that is it's not rocket science, it's basic humanity, skills for people with a bit of reviewing and planning along with it.
So some wise words there from Kimberly, and many thanks to her. There's an extended version of that conversation which will go live on our YouTube channel later this morning. So do check that out if you're interested. We'll be sharing the link to that as well. But as I said, now I've got three guests with me who are going to share some of their thoughts and experiences on all of this. So I'm really pleased to be joined this morning by Mandy Warnock, who's Head of Learning and Development at law firm CMS, also by Chris Howard, who's the Director of Professional Legal Education at King's College London, and also by my colleague Stephen Newson of Meridian West, who's written extensively on strategic learning and development in professional firms, and also has a forthcoming book on leadership in higher education coming later this year. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Mandy, I thought I could start with you, because I know when we were chatting recently, one of the things that you were saying is that actually you found in the last few weeks and months, actually the kind of uptake for more L&D opportunities has I think quadrupled. You said across the firm. I'm kind of interested to hear, what you think's driving that and what people are particularly interested in.
Sure, thanks, Alastair. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so we have always had a reasonable uptake on our training programs, and admittedly, lots of those historically have been face-to-face classroom-based learning. And then with lockdown, we moved quickly to try and convert what we could reasonably to a virtual experience using, Zoom or MS Teams. It was a bit experimental, to be fair, and some of our trainers had to get to grips with that as well. But we were very, very surprised at the overwhelming, subscription rate to the programs. And I think that, for the first time, we've got waiting lists to lots of our courses across the firm, which is quite an excellent thing to see from an L&D perspective. I think what's driving it is probably a number of factors. One, which I could see from your survey, which you've just shown from the peers here, is that I think people are realizing that they can actually on demand more or less dial in, and instead of spending a number of hours, out of, shall we say, billable hour time, they can spend maybe, half an hour to 90 minutes still getting a really good learning experience with, key nuggets of wisdom and some sharing, which is probably just fine. I think they also, I believe, are using these sessions to stay connected with one another and with the trainer, a feeling of some sort of community, and a feeling that they're still owning their development through these uncertain times. So all of this has been very, very positive, and we don't plan to stop doing that once lockdown is over. We want to take that forward and kind of build on having more virtual blended learning approach. So yeah, it's been extremely positive. In terms of topics, we did change out the focus of our learning program to contain more content around things like resilience, well-being, virtual working, how to be productive during these times. And it's been great because lots of people have dialed in for those across the board, from training up to partner. So those sort of topics were used as a refresher to help galvanize people to stay supported and upskilled right now. So that's been very, very positive as well.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And what do you think, what do you think people are looking for at this time? I mean, you talked about resilience being important. What would you say are the kind of key skills they're really looking to build on?
In terms of resilience or other?
Yeah, in terms of it, I guess adjusting to this new way of working.
Yeah.
What's really important?
There's certainly been a very high demand, including from our partners, for support around how to actually appear, present, and give legal advice virtually, taking on board the fact that although you might be able to see the other person, you may have less confidence in terms of looking at the body language, building the rapport, quite frankly making sure your camera works effectively. So we've had quite a big demand for communication skills, using sort of virtual platforms and how to engage, whether you're negotiating something complicated or just having a coffee catch up with the client. So that's been, quite a high demand area for us. In addition to that, the usual programs. So just because we're, sort of locked down doesn't mean people don't want the usual menu of leadership skills, business development sort of programs and things around brand and well-being. So that remains in place. But in particular, it's the communication skills in a remote world that's been extremely popular.
Interesting. And to come to you, Chris, because obviously where you sit, you see kind of across a broad spread of the kind of legal sector, and obviously have training focused on those coming into the profession as well as those at other stages of their career. So I'm interested just to hear, how you see, the shift that we've seen over the last couple of weeks and months. Has that kind of radically changed how you think about training and development?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think at King's, like a lot of universities, we've been hit by this crisis in our own unique way, in the sense that we're going to have we had to immediately send our students back to their home jurisdictions for those who are overseas students, and our domestic students also had to go to their homes, obviously to protect themselves in the light of the crisis. So very quickly we had to reskill as a university and be prepared to immediately deliver all of our programs online, and we've been very successful in doing that, and it's been an incredible achievement on behalf of the law faculty and all of those who've made that happen. But having said that, we were in a way already in that space, because King's had embraced online. We have a great team called King's Online who are devoted to creating and rolling out online resources. And for example, within our law school, we already had 3 online LLM programs that we've developed for working professionals. So those are programs that lawyers can take while they're doing their jobs as a form of self-study. Now, and in fact, we're going to be launching in a couple of days' time our new online tax LLM for international tax lawyers. Now, what we found is that obviously to approach online learning, you need to really think carefully about the objectives you're trying to achieve and how to achieve them. And I think there are different ways in which you can do that. It was interesting to hear Mandy talking about upskilling in terms of communication technology. And certainly for us as an institution, we've had to really think about how best to deploy technology to achieve the educational goals that we want to achieve. And I think there are simpler ways of doing it through things like Teams and other kind of more basic tools. King's Online also help us develop a whole range of interactive learning tools. I mean, picking on some of the themes that have come out so far, I mean, I think 2 things I wanted to say about how to deliver online learning and professional development effectively. I think one of the key things is to think about well-being, because even before this crisis, you always need to think about online students as a particular category, because they need more support, more communication, more of a feeling of involvement, I think, than a student in a face-to-face environment. And I think the other thing that I would say is a real plus point of online learning is that level of control that it gives you. And I think Mandy was alluding to that people can be much more in control of their timings, the way they work, the way they fit their learning around their professional activity. So I think again, it's a terrible situation we're in at the moment, but I think one of the potential long-term benefits is that people will adapt and realize all of the sort of potentiality for online learning. And certainly at King's, we're working in that space very heavily.
Mm-hmm. So how much do you think we're going to see kind of directed learning, and how much are we going to see, you think, are going to shift towards more on demand, as you were saying, people taking more control over how and when they learn in this new environment?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And again, I think this is where we as an institution have to adapt to our students just as they have to work with us. So I think that in our research on what people, certainly professionals looking in the executive education and professional development space, the professionals are looking for manageable learning. They're looking for learning that can be done in increments in a way that they can build up and again fit around their professional development needs in other areas. Obviously, firms always have continual drivers around the billing requirements and the internal training requirements too. So in terms of seeking out external professional development, yes, I think people are more and more time poor in a way, but equally open to a range of possibilities for delivery and open to online learning. I think both students and lecturers, some have always thought that online was a lesser or not as useful as face-to-face learning, but actually I think that's the big change that's kicking in now. People are realizing its potential and thinking, actually, this is in many ways a better way of learning and can really offer opportunities that face-to-face doesn't. And I think that's giving people that control. But yes, you're right. I think those who are taking it up are seeking ways to do it in more kind of chunks, in kind of bite-sized ways. And I think that also reflects a lot of the educational theory about online learning, which suggests that you need to rethink how you present and how you deliver materials, because if you try and simply replicate the face-to-face classroom, it's not going to work effectively.
Mm-hmm. And Stephen, I'm interested to come to you. How much of what Mandy and Chris have been describing has been reflected in the research that you've been doing?
Well, I think a lot of it resonates. I was interested to hear people talking about this sort of idea of self-management, and it's clear that individuals are actually, by and large, coming to grips with this new working environment reasonably effectively. Many firms are finding that people working from home using virtual technologies are in fact more productive than perhaps they were. So I think on the one hand, one might say that there's a greater need for some sort of skills development around the processes of self-management, but perhaps, to my mind, some recognition that the way in which professional firms lead and manage their staff needs to adjust to take account of this, because it seems to me that this is going to be a longer term situation than perhaps one might expect. And so the leadership and management approach within professional firms, which in the past has very often, too often in my view, revolved around presenteeism, people needing to be at their desks for long hours and seen to be there, that I think needs to change, so that perhaps a greater degree of trust occurs. I think there's another aspect which is interesting. The word resilience has been mentioned quite a lot. And I think that is important. But I was in conversation with another colleague a little while ago who made, I think, the very valuable point that alongside resilience, you need to develop the skills of resourcefulness. So looking at how to solve problems in a more creative manner, which I think is interesting. And I think the other point that is worth making is that in the past, we have distinguished between technical skills and soft skills. And I think that this is a point that Chris made in a conversation that he and I were having the other day. It seems to me that now we need to think more in terms of technical knowledge, black letter law, details of tax, accountancy, whatever. So technical knowledge versus technical skills, which might include things like project management, negotiation skills. And then I can't think of a better term than soft skills, which is around human interaction, and learning to interact virtually is, I think, increasingly important because it is different. People's attention spans are different. You lose the paralanguage that sits around communication face to face, etc. So I think those are some interesting aspects. But going back to a piece of research that Nigel Spencer and I included in the series of papers that we wrote a couple of years ago, most young professionals think that their pressing need for the future is actually around the soft skills, technical skills, not so much around the technical knowledge arena. So I think those are the key points.
Interesting. Do you want to come in on that, Chris? Because I know that's an issue that's particularly resonant for you, that how we classify skills and what that means for the future skills makeup of professionals.
Absolutely, and I mean, I think the what's happening in this current environment is it's a bit of a crucible for lots of different factors to come together, and I think the embrace of online and the need for online engagement to be better and more effective goes hand in hand with the implications of legal technology. And again, the big conversation around the education of young professionals now is to what extent is the need for a balance of that technical knowledge of law, those soft skills, that business awareness, that interaction and the resilience skills we talked about, and also an ability to manipulate and get the best out of legal technology. And I think, as I say, this environment puts us very squarely in that space. And I think what we found from our research is that both young lawyers and lawyers in practice at varying stages in their career are really reaching out for that, for those business skills and for those leadership and project management skills. And one of the debates we have internally, we offer our students short courses in negotiation, in strategic decision making, and other equivalent skills. And that's exactly as Stephen put it. I think sometimes the word skills or soft skills somehow devalues or limits people's appreciation of the importance of those aspects, whereas in fact we teach them in a very, very forensic, scientific manner, thinking about the neuroscience and the psychology behind human interaction. And I think actually when looked at in that way, we can see that those skills, those knowledge bases have to be part of curricula, both at undergraduate, postgraduate level for legal programs, but also in executive education and professional development. And I think, again, just coming back to this issue of resilience, resilience is an important all-encompassing point, because it speaks to the need of online learners to be resilient about how they and maintain their discipline and how they manage their self-study. And it also speaks about the ability to cope with the changing psychological demands of this new environment. At King's, we're doing a research piece on the impact of COVID and the lockdown on people's working modes and people's mental health. And I think that's why resilience isn't just a kind of soft skills term, it's an essential asset for an effective lawyer. Mm-hmm.
And I'm interested to come to you as well, Mandy, because one of the things that from professionals perspectives, there's a lot of learning from each other. Typically trainees sit with more experienced members of the team, learn directly from them, and a lot of that is in informal learning. Clearly that's a lot more challenging when we're all sitting in our individual houses. So how can you try and make sure that kind of thing continues when it's clearly more difficult to do day to day?
That's a really good question. And I think it's something that, all firms and organizations need to really think deeply about as we go forward, because the longer the lockdown is in place, the more that issue could become problematic if it's not sort of planned for and sort of well managed. And you're quite right, as you know, the 70% of that, on the job learning takes place on the job, and we're all separated now in our different homes and different environments. Sitting next to your colleague, bouncing things off them, or popping into the partner's sort of area and asking for advice, that's going to be far more difficult to access. So, you know, what we're doing slowly where I am is to just make sure that the mentoring side of things is well in place, even though it's virtual, that, you know, the team leaders are really encouraged to, in fact, communicate more than what they did before, and ensure that there's lots more team gatherings and also one-to-one sort of matter catch-ups than potentially before, just to ensure that people don't forget to pick up on things in the moment, ask questions and carry on learning. I think there's going to be a lot more discipline needed around ensuring that over communication and almost just checking in on people is far more crucial now than potentially what it was when we were sort of back at the ranch. I think that's an issue that needs to be revisited though, as to how we go about doing that. I also think that there's going to need to be some creativity amongst our, well, the law sector in particular, where I'm working, where I think lawyers of any team or different practice groups should be looking at potentially forming their own virtual networks, just to ensure that they can carry on collaborating with one another for whatever purpose they find is important at that time, to avoid isolation, to avoid silos, and to just carry on with the collaboration, which is just so important right now for ourselves and our clients as well. So yeah, a big area that we need to carry on looking at. And any research on that from, you know, Christopher or Meridian West, I'd be really, really keen to see what your thoughts are.
Absolutely. Can I just come with one reflection on that? And I think this is where I think learning communities actually can be a really useful tool in this exercise. As Mandy was saying, you know, we need to stay connected. We need to ensure that that collaboration continues, and it's nice to have a focal point for that. And I think learning environments, online programs, courses, we've certainly found that our online students are as good as, if not better than, our face-to-face students in building cohesive communities and really forming networks that are enduring.
Great.
Alastair, can I just make one point to build on something that Mandy was saying? Mandy, we're talking about the need for greater internal communication. I think that for professional firms, recognizing that clients in business particularly are facing the prospect of a deep and potentially quite prolonged recession, the external communication, really engaging with clients to ascertain what's going on for them, how your firm can best support its clients in the future, that is going to be increasingly important. And I think that developing the mindset that supports that desire to communicate is going to be a real issue going forward.
And to pick up on that as well, Stephen, because I know an issue that you're particularly interested in is what role L&D plays in the future direction of the firm, of professional firms more generally. You've done a lot of work on strategic L&D and forming strategic choices for firms, and I guess we're in a time now where arguably these choices are becoming even more important. There may well be lots of winners going forward, but there also may be a lot of firms that struggle and don't come through this period. So I'm kind of interested, do you think we are going to see firms taking more credence of HR, L&D, and the role that can play in shaping some of these strategic decisions?
Well, my personal view is that certainly should be the case. Whether it will be the case is less clear to me. And I think there is a great danger in the senior leadership of professional firms thinking that this is all going to be over by Christmas and we can just go back to the way it was. And I remember vividly a conversation with a senior banker in back end of 2008 saying, "Don't worry, Stephen, it'll be fine. Next Christmas, it'll be just like 2006. And as we all know, that was not the case. So I think that the need for senior leadership in professional firms to engage effectively with their colleagues in HR, L&D, and indeed other so-called support services has never been greater.
Fantastic. I see that we've ticked on to 9:30, so I know some people may have to leave, but if we've got a bit of time now for any questions. So two ways you can do that, either by typing into the meeting chat for those who can access that. If you can't access the meeting chat, feel free to unmute yourself and ask directly. So I'll give I'll give people just a minute if they want to think of any questions. Just to pick up on what Stephen was saying there about the future role of L&D. I mean, Mandy, where you are at CMS, how important do you think you and your team are going to be in kind of helping the firm continue to thrive through this through this pandemic and beyond?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think that what's really fundamental is to make sure that the learning offering and the offer of coaching and mentoring and that sort of thing in the firm doesn't start to go into the dark corners just because we're also worried about the future and its uncertainty and ambiguity. So we're doing our best to keep it as business as usual with training. I'm sort of proactively, sending more emails and reports, up the chain to the board and things to show them the uptake on training, the topics that are of interest, and also just repeating over and over that the skills that we kind of develop now, it's an opportunity to keep the firm future-proofed, really. And I think that most of our practice group leaders are really keen to make sure that learning and development remains really important, which I know probably people on this call will be thinking about the fact that budgets may be reduced, given where we're going potentially with how long the lockdown is. And so again, it's important for L&D professionals within firms and things to remain, seen to be adding value, creative, responsive, and agile. So we walk the talk. And then if budgets are reduced, we work with our suppliers to make sure that we weather the storm together, is what I'm thinking. But it's true, what Stephen says. I think with HR and L&D, there's opportunities to leverage off this and increase your efficacy within the firm. But to do that, you need to take some ownership, and you need to make sure that you are part of the dialogue that's happening in the higher echelons of the organisation.
Yeah, I mean, can I just jump in and say that two immediate reflections on that. First, as we've seen, actually learning and development will help a lot of people get through this crisis. So the opportunity to be creative, to self-develop, I think will be part of people's well-being and resilience. So in that sense, it'll be essential to firms for their survival. And secondly, we've talked about the need to quickly adapt to working in an online environment. Again, it's L&D that can support that change. And again, that to me makes an essential part of practice even more so.
We just had a question come in, which I think reflects on what you were saying, Mandy, as well as you, Chris, which is, I guess, is there a danger that actually in this current crisis, HR L&D reverts to being seen as a kind of well-being hand-holding function? You get pigeonholed as effectively just helping people navigate this current crisis, and that's not a change for the better necessarily. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I'll pop in there. I think, yes, the resilience and well-being piece remains an important role that HR, if not L&D, should continue to play. It's part of keeping the whole organisation resilient. So that mustn't be diminished. But I do think these new skills and areas and behaviours and mindsets that need to be embedded and improved over this time, in terms of things like, strategic thinking, innovation, in particular, how to stay close to clients and develop your relationship with them. Those aren't those aren't just well-being. Those are critical to the survival of the business in which you operate. And I think if HR and L&D can help and position the function as an enabler and a facilitator of those kind of business skills in particular at this time, which always need to be refreshed and improved amongst all of us, I think that will stop the risk of us just being seen as a sort of a soft touch. I can't stress how important it is for our professionals to be given the support and skills to support our clients through this time. And we can't do that if we don't understand our clients' world, if we don't understand how they're being disrupted, and we don't understand how to actually have effective conversations and give value. And that, to me, is where I think HR and L&D can partner with your internal colleagues to ensure that that support is given across your different enterprises for the benefit of your clients.
Mm-hmm. And on that point as well, I mean, you talked a lot about the support, CMS is giving to partners and other fee earners. What about for, other business services, marketing and BD professionals? What kind of support has been given to those individuals as well?
Well, I'm very fortunate at CMS because we've always had a permanent rolling program of learning and development courses. Many of those courses we call electives cover the topics that are open to the lawyers too. So we have lots of programs where business services and lawyers dial in simultaneously, and those cover topics like resilience. They cover topics like project management, even influencing and brand and all those sorts of things. So as ever, our firm sees that business services it's a huge part of the firm's success. Those people need to be invested in. So they have virtual experiences now. We haven't diminished that. And to be honest, we're looking at beefing up some of those programs for business services, in particular, things like navigating change and being able to be agile and supportive when there's so much disruption going on to support the leadership. So I'm lucky in that sense. I know not everyone is in that position, so we don't take that for granted.
Mm-hmm. Another question has come in which says building rapport is different virtually. Do we have any top tips for that? Maybe Chris, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, very happy to. I mean, first of all, just a very quick one on Mandy's point. I think the point here is that, and this kind of goes to Barbara's question as well, that this change had been happening before COVID. The whole environment for the delivery of legal services was already undergoing change, and so the issues around resilience, well-being, technology, and so on were already out there, and we're changing things. So I think that L&D is just sort of accelerating into this as a result of COVID, but it's not new. In terms of building rapport, I think to me one of the key points, I mean it's fairly obvious, but needs reiterating, is just to not go in with an assumption that something is radically different about virtual environments and that there's some different approach that needs to be taken. And I think, again, what's been really refreshing at King's is to see how our lecturers, some of whom are quite technophobic, have actually very quickly slotted in and found that this is a comfortable environment to work in. So I think the key top tip, first of all, would be, don't assume that something different is needed, and that actually all the protocols, pleasantries, and ways of being that we are face to face can be supported online. I think the second thing is that where an adaptation is required is to be relaxed about the use of the technology and be open, be okay with the potential pitfalls that can occur. So don't be easily put off by a tech breakdown or a mishap. These things will happen, and again, I think there's an adaptability piece about just kind of rolling with that and finding your way into the technology. And I guess the final point, and kind of these are all on the same theme, it is to work with it, not against it. So it's not a fight, you versus the technology. It's provided you collaborate and know that it's designed to facilitate, not to be an inhibitor. I think you're okay. And then I guess in terms of clients. As with everything we do, it's thinking, what's the client perspective? What is the client seeking from this meeting? What is the client seeking from this interaction? How can I use the technology in a way that most benefits the client? So thinking about time of day, obviously, if we're working with global clients, and making sure you don't kind of operate in a London-centric model, but also thinking about their nervousness or inhibition about using the technology, about whether they prefer to write or speak. I mean, one of the most interesting things with students is students very often prefer to type and work on a text base when in this sort of environment, rather than speaking face to face. So kind of forcing people to build a verbal rapport might not be the thing. Actually, sometimes it's better to say, actually, if you're more comfortable using a typed format, that's fine, we'll work with that type format. And again, you can have just as natural a conversation. So I think, again, it's about adaptability, being relaxed, and not expecting too much of either yourself or the client.
Mm-hmm. And Stephen, any final thoughts from you in terms of what's possible there with technology? I mean, I know you've been running a number of coaching sessions virtually, for example. What's your advice around rapport building?
Well, I think Chris has picked up an awful lot of the sort of technology related points, and technology inevitably can be frustrating as much as anything else. But I think the key to my mind is whether you're talking to somebody internally or indeed to clients, because of the nature of virtual meetings, I think it's probably helpful to do a little bit more preparation in advance than you might normally. a pre-meeting email which gives any information that somebody needs to digest prior to a meeting, so you don't waste time talking through the data. They've got a chance to read and digest that in advance, because sharing a spreadsheet on screen is really difficult for very many people. And I think also just taking genuine interest in people, particularly when you're having conversations with clients, being interested rather than interesting is probably a good keynote. And from a purely sort of communication point of view, maybe slowing down delivery slightly, because the intervention of technology, rather like telephone conversation, but perhaps on steroids, technology can make it more difficult to take on board what somebody else is saying.
I think that's right. I think, you know, it's just but it's impressive that I found the way that the brain very quickly adapts to a different pace of conversation. It really does, you know, you instinctively develop a protocol. And I think something else, and this is not a hint, by the way, but in terms of timing, I think, Stephen, you're absolutely right, kind of finding ways to make your time as efficient as possible, because certainly I find online teaching I very much enjoy. I've done it for years, but it's in a sense more mentally tiring than the face-to-face teaching. So, you know, limiting the length of meetings, perhaps foreshortening things a little bit, just with that, again, sensitivity to the fact that your client or your colleague may be more sort of tired, or may find it a slightly more intense experience than the face-to-face, or requiring a different level of concentration.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much to Mandy, to Chris, and to Stephen as well, and also to Kimberly, who we saw in the video earlier. Been great to get your thoughts today. Thanks everyone who's stuck around and able to join us right till the end, and for the questions from the audience as well. As a reminder, this session will be up on YouTube shortly, and we'll be getting a link to you for that as well. And do look out for the next wave of virtual breakfasts. We're really excited about the guests we've got booked on for those, so you'll be hearing about that very shortly, and we look forward to joining you then. Next week, we will have Michelle Panay from Grant Thornton and Ian Benison from Intertrust talking about client research and their client insight programs, how they've changed and adapted those to their current environment. So we hope as many of you can join us then as possible. But for this morning, thank you very much.